Good morning and welcome to Let the Bible Speak. My name is Alex Meredith. I am the minister for the Marquette Church of Christ, and I'm so happy to be back with you here on the program. Brian Poe's done a fantastic job over the last few months. He's actually making the move, as he shared with all of you. He's making a move down to Traverse City, and we pray blessings on him for that, and we pray that God guides his ministry there as well. You may still see him on the program here and there. We're trying to see if we can wrangle him in, even from downstate. So we'll see what that looks like exactly going forward. But today, we're going to be starting out with this lesson on personal integrity with regards to business, with regards to wealth management and all of that fun stuff. And this kind of comes from this misguided idea, I think, that's present within Christianity to a degree, which is that, some people think that your life is very compartmentalized. You get this idea that, I've got my work life over here, I have my personal life over here, my home life here, my religious life here. But when you think about it, here's the reality of the situation. God cares about your character. He cares about who you are on Sunday when you're there in the church auditorium or wherever. And he also cares about your character and who you are on Monday as well. He cares about you whether you are going to him in prayer or whether you are filing your taxes. He cares about your character. In both of those situations, I would say equally, right? It's a holistic view of your life. So let's talk about Tom for a second. Tom was a part-time preacher at one of these small, country churches and did a fantastic job, really knew his stuff, charismatic guy, very hospitable. And he was also an owner of this construction supply company he had started a few years prior. And so he was trying to juggle both of those at the same time to keep him and his family afloat. Now, in order to start that construction supply business, he had secured a number of small business loans from multiple financial institutions. Now, as part of that securing the loan process, those financial institutions wanted regular reports, monthly reports, for him to meet certain benchmarks in order to continue carrying out the terms of the loan. Otherwise, the loans risked being called and the whole principal would be due immediately, right? And so the success of the business was, he had to meet certain thresholds. I guess that's what's important here. So for the last 6 years since he started a business, it was booming. Everything was going very, very well. In fact, he had far exceeded his competitors and everything was great. And then the market crashed. And when it crashed really hard. And him and everybody else in that industry had a really tough time. Well, he was at risk of not meeting his benchmark one of the months. But he knew that for the last few years, there was this one client that he had that for the last few years, once a year, they would put in a very large, sizable order. And he made a big profit off of it, right? And typically, they would order next month. But what he figured out was, surely they're going to order again. And so he decided that he was going to put it on his report for this month that client had already put in the order. So it was going to artificially inflate his profits for the time being. So he puts that in the report. And wouldn't you know it, guess what happens to that client? He gives him a call next month, says, hey, are you ready to put in that order? And the client says, well, we've gone with this other company for now because their prices are better. Well, I can, so he loses the client. Well, eventually it's time for him to pony up to the banks, and he doesn't have the income to be able to pay. And so eventually this discrepancy in the income is discovered, and when they discover that deceptive report, all of the loans are immediately called. And after all of those loans are called, then he ends up having to file Chapter 7 bankruptcy. Now, not only did this shut down his business and did this put him in a lot of financial peril, what do you think this did? What effect do you think this had on his testimony from the pulpit? Now, you might look at that and say, well, those are two totally unrelated things. I'm not so sure, right? If somebody is untrustworthy with the money that they are managing, how can you trust them with your eternal soul, right? When it comes to something even more high stakes, that really affected the way that people received his preaching. I think about that passage in Habakkuk chapter 2, verses 6 and 7. It says, "Woe to him who heaps up what is not his own. For how long? And loads himself with pledges. Will not your debtors suddenly arise, and those awake who will make you tremble? Then you will be spoil for them." That's exactly what happened to Tom, right? And really, when you look at the Bible talks quite a lot about how God's people should conduct business and handle wealth. Now, I think the reason for that is simply because God knew that this was going to be a tremendous source of temptation for God's people, as it is for everybody over the course of human history. That leads us to our main passage for today, which is in Proverbs chapter 11. So we're going to be looking at the first 8 verses of Proverbs. We'll go a few other places as well and discuss some of that. So starting in Proverbs chapter 11, starting in verse 1, and Proverbs gives a lot of wisdom over very practical stuff here, and that's what you're going to see here starting out. So let's see what it says. "A false balance is an abomination to the Lord, but a just weight is his delight. When pride comes, then comes disgrace, but with the humble is wisdom. The integrity of the upright guides them, but the crookedness of the treacherous destroys them. Riches do not profit in the day of wrath, but righteousness delivers from death. The righteousness of the blameless keeps his way straight, but the wicked falls by his own wickedness. The righteousness of the upright delivers them, but the treacherous are taken captive by their lust. When the wicked dies, his hope will perish, and the expectation of wealth perishes too. The righteous is delivered from trouble, and the wicked walks into it instead." I want you to think about and just remind you of who is saying this. The writer of Proverbs, generally agreed upon, and as it's introduced in the beginning of the book in Proverbs 1, is Solomon. Solomon, the son of David. This is the 3rd king of Israel. And by the way, this is the wealthiest man in human history. Just take a look at the snapshot from 2 Chronicles chapter 9. Listen to how rich we're talking. "Now the weight of gold that came to Solomon in 1 year was 666 talents of gold, besides that which the explorers and the merchants brought. And all the kings of Arabia and the governors of the land brought gold and silver to Solomon. King Solomon made 200 large shields of beaten gold. 600 shekels of beaten gold went into each shield. And he made 300 shields of beaten gold. 300 shekels of gold went into each shield. And the king put them in the house of the forest of Lebanon. The king also made a great ivory throne and overlaid it with pure gold. The throne had 6 steps and a footstool of gold, which were attached to the throne. And on each side of the seat were armrests and 2 lions standing beside the armrests, while 12 lions stood there, one on each of the step on the 6 steps. Nothing like it was ever made for any kingdom. All King Solomon's drinking vessels were of gold, and all the vessels of the house of the forest of Lebanon were of pure gold. Silver was not considered as anything in the days of Solomon." That is how rich we're talking. That's crazy, right? And it's here, the wealthiest man in the world is saying, riches will only get you so far. Right? I think he knew what he was talking about. Now, you heard that phrase at the beginning of Proverbs 11. It talks about a false balance. Now, there were 2 ways that ancient merchants could alter a balance, right? A balance in order to work in their favor. The first method of doing this is called leverage fraud, where on the arm of this balance, they could make one arm just slightly longer than the other, right? And force is determined, when you're talking about any sort of lever or anything like that, force is determined by the arm from the fulcrum, right? So the longer the arm, the greater effect any mass has on the imposed force. Basically, if you have a really long arm on this side, a really short arm on this side, it's going to take very little on the long arm side to balance against that short arm side, right? So leverage fraud, you would have the merchants, they would change it just enough to where looking at it, plainly without, taking out something to measure, you couldn't really tell that there was much of a difference, but there was just enough of a difference to work out in a merchant's favor depending on which side he used, whether he was buying or selling. So if he was selling something, and all of the currency back in those days was by weight, and so you would have the person who wanted to purchase something put the weight down, and the merchant could put down just a little bit less on their side, and that way they would get the same amount of money for less product, right? And then if they were buying, they could do it the opposite way. And then you also have this process of weight adulteration, where the buckets, I guess you could say, on each side, the cups, you could scrape out the metal in the bottom of one of those cups and make it artificially lighter. And if you smoothed it out enough, again, looking at it plainly, you couldn't really tell. And again, you could change the amount of weight that was working either with or against you, depending on whether you were buying or selling, right? So that kind of thing was really common in the ancient world, and it was really hard to catch unless you came with some sort of measuring device, right? Which, again, also weren't all that common to just carry around on a regular basis. Now, there are other things that people were doing at that period to financially manipulate things in their favor. One of the things you had people do all the time was you had very wealthy individuals lend out high interest loans to really desperate debtors, right? If being wealthy was not a very common thing back then, and if there is basically one very wealthy family in the midst of this village, and there are a lot of impoverished people, well, if somebody comes into really hard times, they could offer to help them at a really high interest rate, and basically the impoverished person had no other choice, right? And so the wealthy families ended up taking advantage of that situation oftentimes. This kind of behavior, by the way, is specifically condemned in Leviticus 25, 35 through 37. We're not reading it right now. I just wanted to point that out, that Israelites were not supposed to do this, right? Market monopolization was really common. This is actually part of what Jesus was railing against when he goes into the temple and there were those money changers in the temple. What had happened was that all of those priests had bought out the market for all of the birds and the goats and everything that needed to be used for those temple sacrifices. They monopolized the market. And then within the temple grounds, they could charge whatever they wanted, because unless somebody came with their own perfect product, they ended up having to buy from the temple merchants, and they could charge whatever they wanted to because they had bought out the competition. Product dilution was really common. You had wine watered down on a consistent basis. That comes into play in the Cana wedding scene in the Gospel of John, of course. You had people buying spices like cinnamon, right? Well, unless you were a cinnamon connoisseur and really knew your stuff, it was pretty easy for merchants to take that cinnamon, which was very valuable back then, and then grind up some similarly colored seeds, mix it into the bunch, and suddenly it was really cheap for the merchant to do that, and they could charge the same price to the buyer, right? And in Proverbs 11, you have this charge to the Israelite people: don't be like all of them. These things were really common in the ancient world. Don't engage in these manipulative business practices, right? Conduct business with honesty, with integrity. They weren't supposed to be like everybody else. Now, the Bible essentially outlines three main reasons why bad business is, bad. Here's the first reason. Because when business is conducted poorly, it's the innocent who suffer. In the very beginning of Proverbs 11, you have this phrase, when pride comes, then comes disgrace. And that's really the core issue. It's an issue of pride. It's this idea that I deserve more than you, and I don't care if you get hurt in the process, right? That's really at the center of this manipulation problem. Now, back then, you had what you would probably call a zero-sum economy, which basically is just a way of describing the fact that there were a limited number of resources. You have a pizza in front of you, and one person or one family had 7 of the 8 pieces. And as soon as that 8th piece was taken, there's no more pizza, right? It's a zero-sum economy. There are a limited number of resources, and so by wealthy people hyper-consuming the resources that were available in a given geographic region, they were, either intentionally or unintentionally taking away resources from the rest of the people in that region. And that was just the way it was back then, that for a multitude of reasons we don't have time to get into. But it was exacerbated by the fact that these wealthy people were very often the ones engaging in these manipulative practices because they had the leverage to do so. And it was the innocent people, the poor, who often suffered for it. There are several passages that reference this idea and speak out against it. So we'll go through a few of these. So over in Leviticus chapter 19, verse 13, you shall not oppress your neighbor or rob him. The wages of a hired worker shall not remain with you all night until the morning. You could see where a situation like that could be manipulated in the employer's favor. Over in the book of Amos, Amos is one of these minor prophets. We don't actually talk a lot about Amos, but really, really important book. So over in Amos chapter 5, verse 11, some of you probably beat me there as long as it took me. Here we go. Amos chapter 5, verse 11. Therefore, because you trample on the poor and you exact taxes of grain from him, you have built houses of hewn stone, but you shall not dwell in them. You have planted pleasant vineyards, but you shall not drink their wine. For I know how many are your transgressions, and how great are your sins. You who afflict the righteous, who take a bribe, and turn aside the needy in the gate. This is actually a condemnation against Israel for doing the very things that they were told not to do in places like Proverbs chapter 11. Over in Mark chapter 12, there's a great example of this when Jesus is talking about the wealthy Jewish leaders. And listen to what he says here. This is quite stark. Mark chapter 12, verse 38. In this teaching, he said, beware of the scribes who like to walk around in long robes and like greetings in the marketplaces and have the best seats in the synagogue and the places of honor at feast, who devour widows' houses and for a pretense make long prayers. They will receive the greater condemnation. Over in the book of James, James really is quite plain about it. James chapter 2, verse 5, listen, my beloved brothers, has not God chosen those who are poor in the world to be rich in faith and heirs of the kingdom, which he has promised to those who love him? But you have dishonored the poor man. Are not the rich the ones who oppress you and the ones who they drag you into court? Are they not the ones who blaspheme the honorable name by which you were called? And then over in chapter 5, verses 4 through 6. Behold, the wages of the laborers who mowed your fields, which you kept back by fraud, are crying out against you, and the cries of the harvesters have reached the ears of the Lord of hosts. You have lived on the earth in luxury and self-indulgence. You have fattened your hearts in a day of slaughter. You have condemned and murdered a righteous person. He does not resist you, right? So, don't do that. The innocent suffer, right? Secondly, and this is a big one, the second reason that bad business is bad is because it lacks any sort of eternal value. Back to Proverbs 11 again. In verse 4, riches do not profit in the day of wrath. Jump forward to verse 7. When the wicked dies, his hope will perish too, and the expectation of wealth perishes too. Right? There's sort of two parts to this warning. One part of it is that when we talk about wealth, you can't take it with you. At some point, your life will be taken from you, and then your wealth, what's the meaning of it, right? And then the second part of this is that when you idolize wealth, when you tend to do that, when you tend to make an idol out of riches, it tends to destroy your soul, which has a negative eternal consequence tied to it. Just go to a couple passages here over in Ecclesiastes. Ecclesiastes chapter 5, verse 10. He who loves money will not be satisfied with money, nor he who loves wealth with his income. This also is vanity. When goods increase, they increase who eat them, and what advantage has their owner but to see them with his eyes? Sweet is the sleep of a laborer, whether he eats little or much, but the full stomach of the rich will not let him sleep. There is a grievous evil that I have seen under the sun. Riches were kept by their owner to his hurt, and these riches were lost in a bad venture. And he is father of a son, but he has nothing in his hand. As he came from his mother's womb, he shall go again, naked as he came, and shall take nothing for his toil that he may carry away in his hand. There's this wonderful illustration that Jesus, or parable that Jesus tells in Luke chapter 12, where he talks about this man who built bigger barns because he was amassing wealth, and then he dies. And the question is posed to him, what good did that do you? Didn't do anything, right? Now it's useless to you. And then famously in 1 Timothy chapter 6, verses 9 and 10, those who desire to be rich fall into temptation, into a snare, into many senseless and harmful desires that plunge people into ruin and destruction. For the love of money is a root of all kinds of evils. It is through this craving that some have wandered away from the faith and pierced themselves with many pangs. Here's the third reason bad business is bad. It is a distortion of the image that we were created in, namely the image of God, right? In Proverbs 11:1, it starts out with this phrase, a false balance is an abomination to the Lord. That word abomination is a really strong word, by the way. Abomination is also used in Leviticus 18:29, after that long list of sexually prohibitive relationships, right? Well, in reference to those, they are referred to as an abomination. You know what else is referred to as an abomination? In Deuteronomy 7:25, idolatry. And in the same way, Solomon starts out Proverbs 11. A false balance is an abomination to the Lord. Sometimes we get the sense of, oh, well, that's a really big sin, and this one's kind of a smaller one. Ooh, I'm not so sure, I think sometimes things that we think are benign and innocent are a lot more damaging than we realize, right? When we are dishonest, we spur the image of God that we were called to reflect, right? Genesis 1:27 talks about how in God's image we were created. Male and female, he created them. In his image, he created us. Well, we're created in the image of God, and when we lie and deceive, we spurn that image. I think about Titus. Titus chapter 2, Paul is calling on Titus to set an example about, with regards to integrity. He says in Titus chapter 2, verse 7, show yourself in all respects to be a model of good works, and in your teaching show integrity, dignity, and sound speech that cannot be condemned, so that an opponent may be put to shame, having nothing evil to say about us. Can we say that that's true about the church? It ought to be. But unfortunately, it's not very often. Titus was here living on the island of Crete, which was well known to be a place that glorified deception. And he was called to turn that society around, right? To be a beacon of truth in this place that honored lies. There's a story over in Acts chapter 5. We don't have time to read through it, but I'll give you the sort of synopsis of it. Over in Acts chapter 5, you have Ananias and Sapphira who, prior to this, you have this whole movement where the church, these people converting to Christ, particularly the wealthy people, are selling their possessions and then giving to the poor as any had need. That's mentioned in Acts chapter 2, verse 45. And that's great. But one of the things that was happening was sort of incidentally, this is especially true, for instance, in Corinth, these people who were very wealthy, who were doing a lot of good with their wealth, there was sort of a high status that was tied to that. They were treating them, with more favor than they probably should have. And I think Ananias and Sapphira saw that, and I think they wanted in. And so what they did was they sold their property, and they come to the apostles, and they give their money. And what they say is that this is all of it. This is the entire sum of what we got for the property. But that wasn't true. It was a portion of it. And as a result of that deception, Ananias and Sapphira are struck down by God and die, right? But they didn't die because they were wealthy. They didn't even die because they didn't give 100%. They died because they were deceptive, right? They died because they were more interested in the immediate social benefit, in pleasing man and looking honorable in their sight, than they were concerned about their perception in the sight of God, right? When we talk about all of this, here's the big question that this really comes down to. Are you going to do the right thing? Are you going to report that additional income to the IRS that probably they would never find out about otherwise? But are you going to do that? Are you going to take advantage of a gullible buyer that doesn't know any better and work things and skew things in your favor? Are you going to choose to do good even when it hurts your wallet? I have been put, not too long ago, I was actually put in a situation trying to sell a vehicle. And I was put in a situation where I had to decide, am I going to be honest and take a little bit of a hit? Or am I going to try to be deceptive and maybe get a little bit more out of it? Well, I was honest and I have no regrets. It's not lost on me the fact that 2,000 years ago, Jesus was the one caught on the bad end of a business deal. His life was traded away for a mere 30 shekels of silver, right? And that worked out to our benefit. One last passage I want to read to you here. This is in the Psalms. It's in Psalm 7. And I think this says a lot when we think about integrity and doing the right thing. So Psalm chapter 7, verses 8 through 10. The Lord judges the peoples. Judge me, O Lord, according to my righteousness and according to the integrity that is in me. O let the evil of the wicked come to an end, and may you establish the righteous, you who test the minds and hearts, O righteous God. My shield is with God, who saves the upright in heart. I hope that that is true for all of us, and that we can say that in our integrity. Before we go, I want to tell you about some of the resources that we have to offer to all of our viewers. First of all, we have a 7-part workbook series. This is something that you can participate in. This is for your benefit. It's a free resource offered through the World Bible School. You can get more information on that at the worldbibleschool.org website. And if you don't have a Bible, let us know. We'd love to send you one. Again, just let us know that you don't have one. We'll send that to you totally free of charge. You don't have to pay shipping or anything like that. You can reach us by mail at P.O. Box 372, and you can find all of this information as well on letthebiblespeak.net. If you get the chance, look up Let the Bible Speak UP on any of those podcast apps to the right side of your screen there. You can find the audio for all these episodes on there. And if you get the chance, please join us for worship one of these Sundays. Both Marquette and Escanaba meet at 11 a.m. The Marquette Church is right across from the high school there at 1104 West Fair. Feel free to join us there. We're going to be starting a new series next Sunday on end times. I'm really excited about it. I hope you'll join us there. That's going to be on Fox UP at 8 a.m. TV6 is preempted next week. We'll be back in a couple weeks. Hope to see you then. May God bless you.